Robert Mitchell sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor, staring at the stack of complaint letters on his mahogany desk. Each one told the same story. Rude staff, dirty planes, delayed flights, broken seats. As the CEO of Horizon Airways, he had built this airline from nothing 15 years ago. Back then, it was just 3 planes and a dream. Now they had over 200 aircraft flying across the country. But somewhere along the way, something had gone terribly wrong. His assistant knocked and entered with another report. Customer satisfaction was down 23%. Employee turnover was at an all-time high. The board wanted answers, and Robert had none. He had spent the last 6 months in meetings, reviewing spreadsheets, listening to presentations from department heads who assured him everything was fine. The numbers on paper looked acceptable. But these letters from real passengers painted a completely different picture. That evening, Robert sat at home with a glass of whiskey, thinking about his late father. The old man had worked as a baggage handler for 30 years. He used to come home with stories about the golden age of flying, when crew members knew passengers by name and took pride in their work. His father had passed away 5 years ago, never knowing that his son would one day run an entire airline. Robert wondered what his dad would think of Horizon Airways now. The idea came to him suddenly, almost like his father was whispering in his ear. If he wanted the truth, he needed to see it for himself. Not through reports or second-hand information, but as a regular passenger. No fancy first-class treatment, no special attention. Just an ordinary person flying from point A to point B. The next morning, he called his most trusted friend, someone outside the company who could help him book a ticket under a different name. Within an hour, he had a reservation for Flight 447 from New York to Seattle. The name on the ticket read Michael Sullivan, his mother's maiden name. 3 days later, Robert stood in line at JFK Airport, wearing faded jeans, old sneakers, and a plain gray hoodie. He had left his expensive watch at home, along with his briefcase and any hint of who he really was. Around him, families juggled luggage and crying babies. Business travelers tapped impatiently on their phones. An elderly couple held hands, looking nervous about their journey. This was the real world of air travel, and Robert felt oddly invisible in it. Nobody gave him a second glance. For the first time in years, he was just another face in the crowd. The check-in process was slow and frustrating. The kiosks kept freezing. Only 2 agents were working the desk for hundreds of passengers. Robert noticed people checking their watches, anxiety creeping into their expressions as boarding time approached. A mother with 2 small children looked close to tears when her bags were overweight, and the agent quoted an excessive fee. Robert wanted to step in to fix it, but he held back. He was here to observe, not interfere. Security was its own nightmare. The line snaked back and forth for what felt like miles. Robert shuffled forward with everyone else, removing his shoes, emptying his pockets, raising his arms for the scanner. It took 45 minutes to get through. By the time he reached the gate, boarding had already started. He joined the crowd of economy passengers waiting for their zone to be called. Gate 23 was packed. Every seat was taken, and people lined the walls with their carry-on bags. Robert found a spot near the window and watched the ground crew preparing his plane. Well, technically it was his plane. He owned the whole airline. But looking at it now through the scratched terminal window, he saw it differently. The aircraft looked older than he remembered. There was a stain on the fuselage. One of the ground crew members seemed to be arguing with another, their body language tense and frustrated. When his zone was finally called, Robert joined the surge of passengers heading down the jet bridge. The flight attendant at the door offered a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name tag said Jennifer. She looked to be in her early 50s, with lines around her eyes that spoke of long years and short sleep. Robert returned her smile and continued down the narrow aisle, his bag bumping against seats as he searched for 27B, the middle seat. Of course it was the middle seat. A college kid with headphones already occupied the window seat, absorbed in his laptop. The aisle seat held a businessman in a wrinkled suit, typing furiously on his phone. Robert squeezed between them, apologizing as he settled in. The seat felt worn, the cushion compressed from thousands of previous passengers. He reached for the seatbelt and noticed the buckle was scratched and loose. As more passengers filed past, Robert took in his surroundings. The overhead bin above him wouldn't close properly. The entertainment screen on the seat back in front of him had a crack across the corner. The tray table was sticky. These weren't major safety issues, but they painted a picture of an airline that had stopped caring about the details. His father used to say that details were everything in this business. People noticed when you stopped trying. The plane filled quickly, every seat taken. Robert could hear babies crying, passengers struggling with oversized bags, and the constant beeping of phones that should have been silenced. About 20 minutes after his own had boarded, the cabin door finally closed. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a slight delay for paperwork. Around him, passengers groaned and checked their watches. Robert's attention drifted to the galley area just a few rows ahead. 2 flight attendants stood there, going through their pre-flight routine. One was Jennifer from the door. The other was a younger guy, maybe in his 30s, with dark circles under his eyes. They were talking in low voices, probably thinking the engine noise and passenger chatter would cover their conversation. But Robert's seat was close enough and their voices carried. "Did you see the memo about the new scheduling?" the younger attendant said, checking something on his tablet. "They're cutting the turnaround time between flights again. 15 minutes. How are we supposed to clean and restock in 15 minutes? Jennifer shook her head, looking exhausted. "They don't care, Tyler. As long as the planes are in the air making money, that's all that matters to them upstairs." Robert felt his stomach tighten. He leaned back in his seat, pretending to adjust his position, but kept his ears trained on their conversation. "I heard they're eliminating the bonuses too," Tyler continued, his voice dropping even lower, "after promising us last year that if we hit our targets, we'd see the money. We hit every single target, and now they're saying budget constraints." "My husband thinks I should quit," Jennifer said quietly. "After 18 years with this company, he says it's not worth the stress anymore. And honestly, I'm starting to agree with him." Tyler glanced around, then leaned closer. "Between you and me, half the crew is looking for other jobs. The training class last month, 3 people already left. They said the pay wasn't worth the treatment." Robert's hands gripped the armrests. His airline, his company, and the people on the front lines, the ones who actually dealt with passengers every single day, were talking about leaving. We're talking about how management didn't care. We're talking about him even if they didn't know he was sitting right there. The plane began to push back from the gate. Jennifer and Tyler moved down the aisle to check seatbelts and overhead bins. Jennifer passed Robert's row, and for a brief moment their eyes met. She gave him that same tired smile, and he saw something in her expression that made his chest hurt. It was the look of someone who had once loved their job and now just tried to survive it. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Robert stared out the window past the college kid's shoulder. The New York skyline glittered in the afternoon sun. Somewhere in one of those tall buildings was his office, filled with reports and charts and numbers that had told him everything was fine. But here in seat 27B, crammed between strangers in a worn-out plane, he was finally hearing the truth, and the truth was much worse than he had imagined. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Robert watched as Jennifer and Tyler moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, though he could see the exhaustion in every movement. They smiled at passengers, answered questions, and dealt with complaints, all while looking like they hadn't slept properly in days. Robert pulled down his tray table and it wobbled dangerously. The latch was broken, barely holding the weight of the table itself. He tested it gently and it nearly collapsed. This was a safety issue, not just an inconvenience. If turbulence hit and someone had a drink on this table, it would end up in their lap or worse. He made a mental note. One of what he suspected would be many before this flight ended. The businessman in the aisle seat next to him flagged down Tyler as he passed. "Excuse me, is there any way to get the Wi-Fi working? I've been trying for 20 minutes. Tyler's expression shifted to something between sympathy and resignation. "I'm really sorry, sir. The Wi-Fi on this aircraft has been down for about a week. Maintenance keeps saying they'll fix it, but..." He trailed off with a shrug that said everything. "A week?" The businessman's face reddened. "I specifically chose this flight because your website said Wi-Fi was available. I have a presentation to finish." "I understand your frustration," Tyler said, keeping his voice calm and professional. "There's no charge for the Wi-Fi anyway since it's not working. I wish I could do more, but the equipment needs parts that apparently haven't arrived yet." The businessman muttered something under his breath and turned back to his phone, clearly angry. Robert felt anger too, but his was directed inward. A week without Wi-Fi on a 5-hour flight, and nobody had bothered to update the website or inform passengers at booking. These were the kinds of details that destroyed customer trust, and they were happening on his watch. About an hour into the flight, the drink service began. Robert watched Jennifer push the heavy cart down the aisle, her movements careful and deliberate. When she reached his row, she gave him that same tired smile. "What can I get for you?" "Just water, please," Robert said. She handed him a small plastic cup, barely 6 ounces, filled halfway with ice and a splash of water. He noticed her hand shook slightly. When was the last time she'd had a break? When was the last time any of these crew members had been given enough time between flights to rest properly? The college kid by the window asked for a soda. Jennifer reached into the cart and frowned. "I'm sorry, we're out of cola." "We have ginger ale, orange, or lemon lime." "How are you out of cola?" the kid asked, genuinely confused. "The catering company has been short-staffing our flights," Jennifer explained, her professional mask slipping just a bit. "We've reported it multiple times, but nothing changes. We work with what we get." The kid took ginger ale, looking disappointed. Robert's jaw clenched. Catering was contracted through a company that Horizon Airways paid millions to annually. They had strict agreements about what should be stocked on every flight. Either the catering company wasn't fulfilling their contract, or someone at Horizon wasn't holding them accountable. Either way, it was unacceptable. As Jennifer moved past, Robert noticed something that made his heart sink. The bottom of the beverage cart was dented and rusty. One of the wheels squeaked loudly with every push. This was the equipment his crew had to work with. He owned luxury cars that got better maintenance than the tools his employees used every single day. The meal service came next, and Robert chose the chicken option. When Tyler handed him the tray, Robert stared at it for a long moment. The plastic container was barely warm. The chicken looked dry and gray. The side salad was wilted. The roll was hard as a rock. He took a bite of the chicken and immediately regretted it. It wasn't just unappetizing, it was nearly inedible. He wrapped it back up and set it aside. Around him, other passengers were having similar reactions. A woman across the aisle called Tyler over. "This isn't cooked properly," she said, showing him her meal. "The middle is still cold." Tyler's face fell. "I'm so sorry. Let me get you something else." He took her tray and returned a few minutes later with a small bag of pretzels and cheese crackers. "This is all we have available. I apologize. The meals should have been heated properly before we loaded them." The woman accepted the snacks with obvious disappointment, and Robert saw Tyler's shoulders slump as he walked away. It wasn't his fault. He was dealing with the consequences of decisions made far above his pay grade. Yet he was the one who had to face angry passengers and make apologies for problems he didn't create. Robert pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app. He started typing, documenting everything. Broken tray tables, malfunctioning Wi-Fi, inadequate catering, worn equipment, poor quality meals. The list grew longer with each passing minute. About 2 hours into the flight, Robert needed to use the restroom. He stood and made his way to the back of the plane, passing through economy class. What he saw made him feel sick. The cabin was in worse condition than he'd thought. Seat covers were stained and torn. Reading lights didn't work. Air vents were missing their directional nozzles. The carpet was worn through in several places, showing the metal floor beneath. This wasn't just age and normal wear, this was neglect. The lavatory was even worse. The lock was broken, held shut only by a flimsy occupied sign that barely stayed in place. The sink had a slow leak. The mirror was cracked. There was no soap in the dispenser. The smell of stale disinfectant barely covered other, less pleasant odors. Robert finished quickly and returned to his seat, his mind racing with everything he'd seen. As he sat back down, he heard voices from the galley again. Jennifer and Tyler were taking a brief moment between services, and their conversation drifted back to him. "Did you hear about the pilot who quit last week?" Tyler said quietly. "Captain Andrews. 22 years with the company." "I heard," Jennifer replied. "He said the fatigue management system is a joke. They had him flying 6 days straight with minimum rest. He reported it 3 times and nobody did anything. I don't blame him for leaving. They're working everyone into the ground. I picked up this trip because I need the money, but I'm already on my 5th day this week. I'm exhausted," Jennifer sighed. "We all are. But what choice do we have? Bills don't pay themselves. My daughter starts college next year. I can't afford to quit, even though every day I think about it." Robert felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. These were good people, loyal employees who had given years of their lives to his company, and they were being treated like they were disposable. Jennifer had worked for Horizon for 18 years. She'd been there since the early days when they only had a handful of planes and everyone knew each other by name. She deserved better than this. The flight continued and Robert kept observing, kept taking notes. He watched a mother struggle with a baby and a toddler while getting no assistance because the crew was too understaffed to help. He saw an elderly man unable to reach his bag in the overhead bin, straining dangerously until another passenger helped him. He noticed that the emergency card in his seat pocket was outdated, showing an older model aircraft instead of the one they were actually on. About an hour before landing, the plane hit turbulence. It wasn't severe, just enough to make the aircraft bounce and sway. The seatbelt sign came on, and Jennifer's voice came over the intercom asking everyone to remain seated. But Robert was looking up at the overhead bins, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The bin directly above the elderly man across the aisle was shaking. With each bump, it rattled more violently. Then, with a sudden jolt of turbulence, the latch gave way. The bin door swung open and bags started to shift. Robert saw it happening in slow motion. A heavy suitcase was sliding forward, heading right toward the old man's head. "Watch out," Robert shouted, unbuckling and lunging across the aisle. He caught the bag just before it fell, his arms straining with the weight. The elderly man looked up in shock, realizing how close he'd come to serious injury. Tyler rushed over, helping Robert secure the bag and close the bin. But the latch wouldn't stay. It was broken, just like so many other things on this plane. Tyler had to hold it shut until the turbulence passed, standing in the aisle with his arm raised, his face tight with frustration and embarrassment. "Thank you," the elderly man said to Robert, his voice shaking. "That could have been really bad." Robert nodded, returning to his seat. His heart was pounding, not from the physical effort, but from the realization of how serious this was. That wasn't just poor maintenance or cost cutting. That was a genuine safety hazard. Someone could have been seriously hurt, maybe even killed because an overhead bin latch wasn't properly maintained. He looked at Tyler, still holding the bin closed, and saw the young man's jaw clench. This crew member knew the plane had problems. They all did. They reported things, filled out maintenance forms, flagged safety concerns, and nothing happened. The planes kept flying, the problems kept growing, and the crew kept taking the blame when things went wrong. When the turbulence finally subsided and Tyler could let go of the bin, Jennifer approached with a roll of tape. She taped the bin shut, a temporary fix for a problem that should have been properly repaired days or weeks ago. She caught Robert's eye and gave him a look that was part apology, part resignation. Robert sat back in his seat, his mind no longer just observing but calculating. He had seen enough, more than enough. The question now wasn't whether changes needed to be made. The question was how fast he could make them, and whether his company could recover from the damage that had already been done. The pilot announced their descent into Seattle. Around him, passengers stirred, gathering their belongings and preparing to land. Robert stared out the window at the clouds below, thinking about everything he'd witnessed. This flight was supposed to give him answers. It had given him that and so much more. It had shown him the truth about what his airline had become, and it had shown him exactly who was paying the price for his company's failures. The people who worked for him. The people who trusted him. The people he had, without meaning to, let down completely. The plane touched down in Seattle with a hard bump that made several passengers gasp. Robert felt the jolt through his entire body as the aircraft bounced once, then twice, before finally settling on the runway. The landing was rougher than it should have been. He wondered if the pilots were exhausted too, pushed to their limits by the same system that was grinding down everyone else. As they taxied to the gate, Robert's mind was already working through everything he needed to do. But first, he needed to see this experience through to the end. He needed to witness the full picture of what his passengers and crew dealt with on every single flight. The plane came to a stop, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Immediately, passengers jumped up, yanking open the overhead bins and crowding into the aisle. Robert stayed seated, watching the chaos unfold. A woman struggled with her suitcase, nearly dropping it on the person below. The businessman next to him shoved past people without a word, desperate to get off the plane. The elderly man who'd almost been hit by the falling bag moved slowly, nervously eyeing the overhead bins. Jennifer stood at the front door, thanking passengers as they filed out. Most people ignored her, too focused on getting to their destinations. A few muttered complaints about the flight. One man actually blamed her personally for the Wi-Fi not working, his voice loud and aggressive. Jennifer took it all with that same tired smile, apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Robert waited until almost everyone had deplaned. He wanted a chance to observe the crew in these final moments, when they thought no passengers were watching. He pretended to struggle with his bag, taking his time, keeping his head down but his ears open. Tyler was in the galley, already starting the cleanup process. Robert could hear him talking to himself, counting items. 16 sodas short, 23 meals unserved because they were cold. 3 broken seatbelts reported. His voice was flat, defeated. These were problems he'd have to document, knowing nothing would change. Jennifer joined him, her professional mask finally dropping now that the passengers were gone. She leaned against the galley wall and closed her eyes. "I'm too old for this," she said quietly. "My feet are killing me. My back is killing me. Everything is killing me. How much time do we have before the next flight?" Tyler asked. Jennifer checked her phone. 38 minutes. We're supposed to clean, restock, do safety checks, and board a full flight to Denver in 38 minutes. That's impossible. Tell that to scheduling. Robert felt anger rising in his chest again. 38 minutes. No wonder the planes were in such poor condition. No wonder things weren't being properly cleaned or maintained. The crew was being set up to fail, pushed to work faster than was safe or reasonable. He finally grabbed his bag and made his way to the front. As he approached the door, Jennifer straightened up, putting that professional smile back on. "Thank you for flying with Horizon Airways," she said automatically. Robert stopped and looked at her directly. "How long have you been doing this?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Flying? 18 years. Do you still love it?" For a moment, her mask cracked completely. He saw the real emotion underneath, the exhaustion and disappointment and something that looked a lot like grief. "I used to," she said softly. "I really used to." Robert nodded and walked off the plane, his heart heavy. He made his way through the jet bridge and into the terminal, blending back into the crowd of travelers. But instead of heading to baggage claim, he found a seat near the gate and watched. He wanted to see what happened next. The cleaning crew arrived about 10 minutes after the last passenger deplaned. There were only 2 of them for the entire aircraft. Robert watched through the window as they rushed through the cabin with trash bags and cleaning supplies. They were moving fast, too fast to do a thorough job. They grabbed visible trash, wiped down a few surfaces, and that was it. The deep cleaning that planes needed, the kind that maintained hygiene and safety standards, simply wasn't happening. Meanwhile, Jennifer and Tyler were trying to restock the plane. Robert watched them making multiple trips between the plane and a supply cart, carrying heavy boxes and bags. No help from ground crew, no assistance from anyone. Just 2 exhausted flight attendants doing the work of 4 or 5 people in half the time they needed. A pilot emerged from the cockpit, a woman in her 40s with gray streaking through her dark hair. She was on her phone, and her voice carried through the jet bridge. "I'm telling you, I reported the landing gear indicator 3 times. 3 times. It's giving false readings. And someone is going to think there's a problem when there isn't, or worse. Think everything is fine when it's not." She listened to whoever was on the other end and her expression darkened. "I don't care what maintenance says. I've been flying for 20 years and I know when something isn't right. But sure, keep ignoring the pilots. See how that works out." She ended the call and stood there for a moment, her shoulders slumped. Then she straightened up, put on her pilot's hat and walked back onto the plane. Professional to the end, even when the system was working against her. Robert's phone buzzed. It was his assistant, asking about tomorrow's board meeting. He stared at the message for a long moment, then turned his phone face down. The board meeting felt like it was happening in another world, one where problems were abstract and solutions came from spreadsheets. This was the real world, and it was broken in ways that numbers couldn't capture. New passengers began arriving at the gate for the Denver flight. Robert watched them check in, oblivious to the chaos happening behind the scenes. They trusted that the plane was safe, that the crew was rested, that everything was being done properly. That trust was being betrayed, and they had no idea. He stood up and made his way toward the windows where he could see the aircraft better. Ground crew members were loading bags, and even from a distance, Robert could see the rushed, careless way they worked. Bags were being thrown rather than placed. He saw one worker light a cigarette right next to the fuel line, a massive safety violation. Another was on his phone, not paying attention to the equipment he was operating. This wasn't just about the flight crew or the cabin condition. The problems went deeper, spreading through every level of operations. The culture of his company had shifted from excellence to just getting by, from taking pride in the work to just surviving another shift. Robert pulled out his phone and started making calls. His first was to his head of operations, a man named George who'd been with the company for 8 years. George answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful and confident. "Robert, what can I do for you?" "I need you to pull the maintenance records for aircraft N447, Robert said, keeping his voice calm. "The plane that just flew from New York to Seattle, and I need the crew scheduling for Flight 447, both the cabin crew and the pilots." "Sure thing. Is there a problem?" "Yes," Robert said simply. "There's a problem. How many safety reports have we received in the last 6 months?" There was a pause. "I'd have to check the exact number. Ballpark it for me. Maybe 200? 250? And how many resulted in actual changes or repairs?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'd have to review the files." "George, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want an honest answer. Are we cutting corners on maintenance and safety to save money?" The silence stretched out. Robert could almost hear the man trying to figure out what to say, how much to admit. "We've had to make some difficult decisions," George finally said. "The board wanted cost reduced. We've been trying to balance safety with efficiency." "You can't balance safety," Robert said, his voice hard now. "Safety isn't negotiable. It's not a line item you adjust to meet profit margins. With all due respect, sir, you approved the budget cuts that led to these decisions." That hit Robert like a physical blow. He had approved those budgets. He'd signed off on cost reduction initiatives without fully understanding what they meant in practical terms. He'd trusted his executives to maintain standards while cutting expenses, and they'd chosen to sacrifice the former to achieve the latter. "We'll talk more about this," Robert said. "But right now I need you to ground any aircraft with outstanding safety reports until they're properly inspected and repaired. I don't care what it costs or how many flights get canceled. Robert, we can't just ground planes. Do you know how much that will cost?" The board works for the shareholders, and I'm the largest shareholder," Robert interrupted. "Ground the planes. We'll deal with the fallout." He ended the call and took a deep breath. Through the window he could see the Denver flight was almost ready to board. Jennifer appeared at the gate desk looking even more exhausted than before. She barely had time to catch her breath before passengers started lining up. Robert watched her scan boarding passes, answer questions, and manage the crowd. She was professional, courteous, and completely drained. In 38 minutes, she'd cleaned a plane, restocked supplies, done safety checks, and now she was boarding another full flight. After that, she'd work another 5-hour flight to Denver. And then what? Another quick turn before flying back to New York? This wasn't sustainable. It wasn't humane. And it was happening because he'd allowed it to happen. A young family approached the gate, parents with 2 small children and a baby. The father was struggling with car seats and diaper bags while the mother held the crying infant. Jennifer saw them and immediately came around the desk to help, taking bags and directing them to pre-board. Even exhausted, even overworked, even treated poorly by the company she'd given 18 years of her life to, she still cared about people. Robert made a decision right then. He wasn't going to wait for reports or meetings or carefully planned rollouts. The problems were urgent and the solutions needed to be urgent too. But first, he needed to do something he should have done years ago. He walked up to the gate desk and waited until Jennifer finished helping the family. When she returned to the desk, he stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said. "Could I have a moment of your time?" "It's important." Jennifer looked at him confused. She clearly recognized him from the flight but didn't understand why a passenger would want to talk to her now. "Sir, I'm about to board this flight. If you have a complaint, you can call our customer service." "I'm not here to complain," Robert interrupted gently. "I'm here to apologize. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm the CEO of Horizon Airways." The color drained from Jennifer's face. Tyler, who was nearby preparing the jet bridge, froze. The gate agent behind the desk looked up in shock. I heard everything today, Robert continued. I saw everything. And I need you to know that things are going to change. Starting right now. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes went wide with shock, then fear, then something that looked like anger. Tyler stepped back, his face pale. The gate agent grabbed the edge of the desk as if she might fall over. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The noise of the busy terminal continued around them, passengers rushing past, announcements echoing overhead. But in their small circle, everything had gone silent. Oh my God, Jennifer finally whispered. Everything I said on that plane. Everything Tyler and I talked about. You heard all of it. Every word, Robert confirmed. And I needed to hear it. That's why I was there. Tyler found his voice, though it shook. Are we fired? Is that why you're here? Fired? Robert looked genuinely shocked. No, absolutely not. You two are exactly the kind of employees this company needs. You're doing an impossible job under terrible conditions, and you're still trying to take care of passengers. If anything, I should be the one worried about losing my job. I don't understand, Jennifer said, her professional composure completely gone. She looked vulnerable, confused, almost fragile. Why would you go undercover on your own airline? Why not just read the reports? Because reports lie, Robert said simply. Or rather, the people writing them lie. Or they don't know the truth, because nobody tells them. I've been sitting in an office looking at numbers that said everything was fine. Customer satisfaction was acceptable. Costs were under control. Profits were steady. But the complaint letters kept coming, and they told a different story. So I decided to see for myself. And? Tyler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What did you see? Robert's expression hardened. I saw a company that's failing its people. I saw safety issues that could get someone killed. I saw employees working themselves into the ground for a company that doesn't appreciate them. I saw exactly what happens when executives prioritize spreadsheets over human beings. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back quickly, trying to maintain composure, but one escaped down her cheek. I've been here 18 years. I stayed loyal through everything. Through the merger, through the restructuring, through every policy change. I stayed because I believed in this company. I believed we were supposed to be different, better than the other airlines. You believed correctly, Robert said. We were supposed to be better. We were better, and we're going to be better again. With all due respect, sir, Tyler said, his voice gaining strength. We've heard promises before. Every new executive talks about change. Nothing ever changes. It just gets worse, Robert nodded. You're right to be skeptical. But I'm not just another executive. I built this airline. I chose the name. I picked the colors. I hired the first employees. And somewhere along the way I lost sight of what made it special. I delegated too much. I trusted the wrong people. I looked at numbers instead of looking at reality. That ends today. The gate agent, a young woman named Rita, finally spoke up. The flight to Denver boards in 10 minutes. Jennifer and Tyler have to work it. No, they don't, Robert said firmly. Not today. How many flights have you worked this week, Jennifer? This is my 6th day, she said quietly. And you, Tyler? 5th. I picked up extra shifts because I need the money. Robert pulled out his phone and made a call. When someone answered, he spoke clearly and directly. This is Robert Mitchell. I need you to find replacement crew for Flight 738 to Denver departing Seattle. I need them here in 20 minutes. Yes, I know that's difficult. Pay whatever overtime is necessary. Pull crew from training if you have to. But I want Jennifer Harris and Tyler Chen off the schedule for the rest of today with full pay. He paused, listening. Because I'm the CEO and I said so. Make it happen. He ended the call and looked at Jennifer and Tyler. You're both going to come with me. We're going to have a conversation, a real one. And you're going to tell me everything. Every problem, every concern, every safety issue you've been reporting that gets ignored. Everything. Sir, we can't just leave our post. Jennifer protested, though her voice lacked conviction. There are procedures. The procedures are part of the problem, Robert said. Rita, can you handle the boarding once the replacement crew arrives? Rita nodded, still looking stunned by everything happening. Then it settled. Robert turned back to Jennifer and Tyler. Please, I know you don't owe me anything, especially after what you've been through. But I'm asking you to trust me for one afternoon. Help me understand what needs to change. Jennifer and Tyler exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them. The kind that happens between people who've worked together through difficult times. Finally, Jennifer nodded. Okay, she said, but I want Captain Diane Wilson there too. She's the pilot from our flight. She's been reporting maintenance issues for months and nobody listens to her either. Done. Robert agreed immediately. Anyone else? Tyler thought for a moment. Kevin from ground crew. If you really want to understand the problems, you need to hear from him. He's the one trying to load bags safely while being timed down to the second. Get them both, Robert said. I'll book a conference room. We'll order food. Real food, not airplane food. And we'll talk for as long as it takes. 2 hours later, Robert sat in a conference room at the airport hotel with Jennifer, Tyler, Captain Diane Wilson, and Kevin Martinez from ground crew. The table was covered with sandwiches, salads, and coffee. Real china plates, not plastic containers. Robert had insisted on that detail. These people deserved to be treated well, even in this small way. Captain Diane was the first to speak. She was direct and didn't waste words. The planes are falling apart. Not dramatically, not all at once, but piece by piece. Every flight, I report something. A faulty indicator, a worn component, a system that's working but not working well. I fill out the forms. I follow the procedures, and nothing happens. Maintenance stamps it as resolved without actually resolving it. How long has this been going on? Robert asked. At least 2 years. Maybe longer. It got worse after the cost-cutting initiatives. Suddenly, everything became about minimum standards instead of optimal standards. If something technically works, even if it's barely working, it doesn't get replaced. Kevin leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the table. It's the same on the ground. We're told to load planes in 12 minutes. 12 minutes for 150 bags, cargo, mail, everything. That's less than 5 seconds per bag. You can't do that safely, so we rush. We throw bags instead of placing them. We skip safety checks because there's no time. And when something goes wrong, we get blamed. How many people are on your loading crew? Robert asked. Supposed to be 5. Usually it's 3. Sometimes it's 2. Why? Kevin shrugged. Management says it's all they can staff. But I know guys who applied for jobs and never heard back. I think they don't want to hire more people because it costs money. Robert made notes on his tablet, his jaw tight. What else? Tyler spoke up. The catering is a disaster. We're supposed to have full beverage service, hot meals for everyone, and backup supplies. Half the time we get maybe 70% of what we need. The meals aren't heated properly. The drinks aren't fully stocked. We've reported it to the catering manager dozens of times. Nothing changes. Because the catering company knows they can get away with it, Jennifer added. They have a contract, but nobody enforces it. They deliver partial orders, charge full price, and face no consequences. What about the crew scheduling? Robert asked. How often are you working maximum hours? Jennifer laughed, but there was no humor in it. I can't remember the last time I worked minimum hours. They schedule us right up to the legal limit every time. We're supposed to have 10 hours between shifts. We get exactly 10 hours, which sounds fine until you realize that includes travel time to and from the hotel, checking in, trying to sleep in an unfamiliar bed. You might get 5 or 6 hours of actual rest if you're lucky. Captain Diane nodded. It's the same for pilots. We're exhausted, all of us, and exhausted pilots make mistakes. We haven't had a major accident yet, but it's only a matter of time. The room fell silent. That last sentence hung in the air like a dark cloud. Only a matter of time. Robert felt that truth settle into his bones. His airline, his company, was a disaster waiting to happen. Not because of bad luck or unforeseeable circumstances, but because of choices. Choices he had approved or allowed or failed to prevent. I need to know something, Robert said quietly. And please be honest. Is it too late? Is the damage so severe that the company can't be saved? Jennifer considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, I would have said yes. People were leaving in droves. Morale was at rock bottom. Passengers were switching to other airlines. But recently, something interesting happened. The complaints started going directly to you. Usually, they get filtered through customer service, redirected, lost in the system. But somehow they started reaching your desk. And that tells me maybe there's still someone at the top who cares. That was me, Robert admitted. I set up a direct email. I wanted to see the unfiltered feedback. What I saw horrified me. Good, Tyler said firmly. You should be horrified. We've been horrified for years, living it every day. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Robert looked at each of them in turn. These 4 people, from different parts of his company, all telling the same story. They were tired, they were frustrated, but they were still here. They still showed up. They still cared, despite everything. I'm going to fix it, Robert said. Not with memos or policy changes or empty promises. I'm going to rebuild this company from the ground up. But I need your help, all of you. I need you to be part of the solution. What does that mean? Captain Diane asked, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. It means I'm creating a task force. Employees from every department, every level. People who actually do the work, not executives who just talk about the work. You'll have direct access to me. You'll have authority to make changes, and you'll have the budget to do it right. The board will never approve that, Jennifer said. Robert smiled, and for the first time since entering that conference room, it was a genuine smile. The board works for the shareholders. I control 51% of the shares. The board will approve whatever I tell them to approve. Kevin spoke up, his voice cautious. And what if this task force finds problems you don't want to hear about? What if fixing things costs more than you're willing to spend? Then we'll spend more, Robert said simply. This company was built on the idea that flying should be safe, comfortable, and dignified. We lost sight of that. We're going to find it again, no matter what it costs. He stood up and extended his hand to Jennifer first. Thank you for 18 years of service. Thank you for caring when nobody else seemed to. And thank you for being honest with me today. Jennifer stood and shook his hand, tears in her eyes again. Don't let us down, she said. Please. We can't take another disappointment. I won't, Robert promised. That's a guarantee. 2 weeks after his undercover flight, Robert stood in the same hangar where Horizon Airways had started 15 years ago. Back then, it was just him, 3 planes, and a handful of employees who believed in his vision. Now the company had over 200 aircraft and thousands of employees, but somewhere along the journey to success, they'd lost what made them special. Today, he was here to start getting it back. The hangar was filled with employees, not just executives or managers, but the people who actually made the airline work. Flight attendants, pilots, ground crew, mechanics, gate agents, baggage handlers, cleaning staff. Over 500 people had gathered, and more were watching via video link at other airports across the country. Robert had personally invited them. No corporate announcements, no formal memos. He'd sent individual emails asking people to come hear what he had to say. Jennifer and Tyler stood in the front row. Captain Diane was there with a group of pilots. Kevin had brought his entire ground crew team. Robert saw faces of every age and background, unified by one thing. They all looked skeptical. They'd heard promises before. They had no reason to believe this time would be different. Robert stepped up to the microphone without notes or a prepared speech. He'd spent 2 weeks thinking about what to say, but in the end he realized the truth was simple. Thank you for coming, he began. I know many of you are wondering why you're here. Some of you are probably worried this is about layoffs or more bad news. I want to start by telling you that's not what this is. This is about acknowledgement, apology, and action. He paused, looking across the crowd. 2 weeks ago, I flew from New York to Seattle on Flight 447. I sat in seat 27B. I wore regular clothes. I used a different name. None of you knew who I was, and that was intentional. I wanted to experience this airline the way our passengers experience it, the way you experience it every day. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances. Those who had worked Flight 447 looked stunned. What I saw broke my heart, Robert continued, his voice thick with emotion. I saw planes that weren't properly maintained. I saw crew members work to exhaustion. I saw safety issues being ignored. I saw good people trying to do excellent work with inadequate resources and impossible schedules. And I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I failed you. The hangar went completely silent. I approved budgets that cut corners. I trusted executives who prioritized profits over people. I looked at spreadsheets instead of looking at reality. I let this company become something it was never supposed to be. And for that, I am deeply, profoundly sorry." Jennifer had tears streaming down her face. Several other employees were crying too. Some looked angry, others just looked tired. "Words aren't enough," Robert said. "Apologies aren't enough. So I'm here to tell you about actions, real, concrete changes that start today. First, effective. Immediately, we are grounding 15 aircraft for comprehensive maintenance and safety inspections. Yes, this will cost us money. Yes, we'll have to cancel flights, but we will not compromise on safety ever again." The crowd stirred. This was unprecedented. Second, we are hiring 500 new employees across all departments. Flight crews, ground crews, maintenance, everyone. No more skeleton staffing. No more expecting 5 people to do the work of 10. We're going to have enough people to do the job right. People were whispering now, but Robert could see hope starting to replace skepticism in some faces. Third, we are ending the policy of minimum rest periods for crew, or new rule. Every employee gets at least 12 hours between shifts, not 10. And that's 12 hours of actual rest, not including travel time. If that means we need to hire more people or adjust schedules, so be it. Captain Diane's eyes widened. This was something pilots had been demanding for years. Fourth, I'm terminating our contract with the current catering company and bringing catering in-house. We'll control quality, quantity, and standards. Passengers deserve real meals. Crew members deserve proper supplies to do their jobs. Kevin from ground crew was nodding vigorously, a smile breaking across his face. Fifth, and this is important, I'm establishing an Employee Safety and Standards Council. This council will have members from every department and every level of the company. They will have direct authority to stop any practice they deem unsafe. They will report directly to me, and they will have the power to make changes without having to go through layers of bureaucracy. Robert paused and looked directly at Jennifer. Jennifer Harris will chair this council. Tyler Chen, Captain Diane Wilson, and Kevin Martinez will serve as founding members. They'll select additional members from volunteers across the company. Jennifer's hand went to her mouth. Tyler looked stunned. They hadn't expected this. Sixth, every executive at this company, including me, will fly economy class unannounced at least once per quarter. We need to experience what our passengers experience. We need to see what our crew members are dealing with. No more insulation. No more pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Some people in the crowd were starting to clap, but Robert held up his hand. I'm not done. Seventh, we're restoring all employee benefits that were cut over the past 3 years. Health insurance, retirement matching, annual bonuses based on company performance. These things should never have been taken away. Now people were really starting to react. The energy in the hangar was shifting from skepticism to something else, something that looked like hope. Eighth, we're investing $50 million in aircraft upgrades and maintenance over the next year. New seats, new entertainment systems, better cleaning protocols, updated equipment. This airline will be something we're all proud of again. Robert took a breath. This next part was the hardest. Finally, I'm asking for your help. Every single person in this room, watching on video or working at any Horizon Airways location. I can't fix this company alone. I need you to tell me when things aren't right. I need you to hold me accountable. I need you to believe that change is possible even when it's hard to believe. He pulled something from his pocket and held it up. It was a photo, slightly faded, showing the original Horizon Airways team standing in front of their first plane. This picture was taken 15 years ago. We were small. We were inexperienced. But we cared. We cared about doing things right. We cared about treating people well. We cared about being better than everyone said we could be. That spirit, that purpose, that's what I want to get back. Not by going backwards, but by remembering why we started in the first place. Robert set the photo down and looked out at the crowd. Some of you are thinking this sounds too good to be true. You're thinking, I'll make these promises and then nothing will change. I understand that. Trust has to be earned, especially when it's been broken. So I'm not asking you to trust me based on words. I'm asking you to watch what happens next. Judge me by actions, not promises. The hangar erupted in applause. It started slow, then built like a wave. People were standing, clapping, some crying, some cheering. Robert saw Jennifer hugging Tyler. He saw Kevin shaking hands with the people around him. He saw Captain Diane nodding with approval. But not everyone was celebrating. Robert noticed a group of older employees in the back, arms crossed, expressions still doubtful. He understood. They'd seen management changes before. They'd heard grand speeches. Words were easy. Following through was hard. After the meeting, Robert made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and listening to stories. An older mechanic stopped him. "I've worked here 12 years, the man said. I've seen 3 CEOs make promises. None of them kept their word. You seem sincere, Mr. Mitchell, I hope you are. But forgive me if I wait to celebrate until I see real changes." "I don't blame you," Robert said honestly. "What's your name?" "Frank Patterson." "Frank, I want you to do something for me. Keep a list. Every promise I made today, write it down. Check them off as they happen or don't happen. And in 6 months, I want you to come to my office and show me that list. If I failed to deliver on these promises, I want to know." Frank studied Robert's face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll do that. But I'll tell you right now, I hope you prove me wrong. This used to be a good place to work. I'd like it to be that way again." Over the next 6 months, Robert kept his promises. The grounded planes were thoroughly inspected, and serious issues were found and fixed on 7 of them. 3 aircraft were retired entirely as beyond safe repair. New employees were hired, and the desperate, rushed feeling that had permeated every department began to ease. Crew members started getting actual rest. The quality of food and service improved. Complaint letters decreased by 60%. The Employee Safety and Standards Council, led by Jennifer, became one of the most important bodies in the company. They identified and fixed hundreds of issues, from broken equipment to unsafe procedures to scheduling problems. More importantly, they gave employees a voice that was actually heard. Robert flew economy every month, sometimes more. He talked to passengers. He listened to crew members. He saw problems and fixed them. It wasn't always easy. The board complained about costs. Some executives quit, rather than adapt to the new culture. Shareholders worried about short-term profits, but Robert held firm. The company was going to do things right even when it was expensive or difficult. One day, 6 months after the hangar meeting, Frank Patterson appeared at Robert's office. He carried a worn notebook. Robert invited him in and offered him coffee. "I made that list you asked for," Frank said, opening the notebook. "All the promises from the meeting, and?" Robert asked, bracing himself. Frank flipped through pages covered in his handwriting. Notes, dates, check marks. He looked up at Robert, and for the first time he smiled. "You did it. Every single one. Some took longer than others, but you followed through on everything." Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you for holding me accountable, Frank." "That's not why I'm here," Frank said. "I'm here because yesterday I was working on one of the new aircraft. The equipment was top-notch. Everything I needed was available. I had enough time to do the job right. And when I finished, I felt something I haven't felt in years." "What's that?" "Pride," Frank said simply. "I was proud of the work I did. Proud of the company I work for. That's what you gave back to us, Mr. Mitchell. Not just better conditions or better pay, though those matter. You gave us back our pride." A year after Flight 447, Horizon Airways was named the best airline in customer satisfaction. Employee retention was at an all-time high. Safety ratings were excellent. The company was profitable again, proving that doing right by people and doing right by business weren't contradictory goals. Robert kept that photo from the hangar on his desk, right next to a new photo, him in seat 27B. Both images reminded him of the same truth. Success wasn't about how big you grew or how much profit you made. It was about staying true to the values that made you successful in the first place. It was about remembering that behind every number on a spreadsheet was a real person whose life you affected. And it was about having the courage to admit when you were wrong and the commitment to make things right, no matter what it cost.